Dealings with the Dead, number 87. It may be said of a proud poor man, especially if he be a fearless, godless man, as Dirk Hatterick said of himself to Glosson, that he is dangerous. It is quite probable there are men, even in our own limited community of 130,000 souls, who would rather die an easy death than signify abroad their inability to maintain any longer their expensive relations to the fashionable world. What will not such a man occasionally do, rather than submit gracefully under such a trial to the will of God? He will beg, and he will borrow. He will lie, and he will steal. Is there a crime in the Decalogue, or out of it, which he will not occasionally perpetrate, if its consummation be likely to save him from a confession of his poverty, and from ceasing to fill his accustomed niche in the beau monde? Not one. No, not one. Well, may we who profess to be Republicans adopt the wisdom and the words of Montesquieu: the less luxury there is in a republic, the more it is perfect. Some words left out. Republics end with luxury. And let us remember that America, like Iran, is a constitutional republic. A significant illustration of these remarks will readily occur to every reader of American history in the conduct and character of Benedict Arnold. Among the dead, who with their own hands have prepared themselves graves of infamy, there are men of elevated rank who have made shipwreck of the fairest hopes in a similar manner. But far in advance of them all, Arnold is entitled to a terrible preeminence. The last turn of the screw crushes the victim. It is the last feather, says the Bedouins, that breaks the camel's back, and the train, which has been in gradual preparation for many years, may be exploded in an instant by a very little spark at last. Now, with sports, people do that too much. They're like, oh, the last play, you ruined it all, or something like that. And it's like, I mean, if people tried a little harder there, or somebody else did something a little there, they might have had victory. So saying it's, the last play or something, or even a big play, There are periods in the lives of certain individuals when, upon the approach of minor troubles, baleful stars, doubtless, but of the third or fourth magnitude, it may be said, as Rochefoucauld said of the calamities of our friends, that there is something in them not particularly disagreeable to us. A man whose afflictions, especially when self-induced, are chafing at every turn against his already lacerated pride, and who is seeking some apology for deeds of desperation, often discovers with a morbid satisfaction in some petty offense or imaginary wrong ample excuse for deeds absolutely damnable. Such were the influences at work in the case of Benedict Arnold in 1780. In obedience to the sentence of court-martial, he was reprimanded by the commander-in-chief, but in terms so highly complimentary that it is impossible to read them without a doubt whether this official reprimand were a crown of thorns or a crown of glory. At that very time, Arnold's pecuniary embarrassments were overwhelming. Without the rightful means of supporting a one-horse chaise, he rattled up and down in the city of Philadelphia in a chariot and four. The splendid mansion which he occupied had in former times been the residence of the Penns. Here he gave a sumptuous repast to the French ambassador, and entertained the minister and his suite for several days. Hunger, it is said, will break through stone walls. Even this is a feeble illustration of that force and energy which characterized Arnold's passion for parade. To support his career of unparalleled extravagance and folly, he resorted to stratagems which would have been contemptible in a broker of the lowest grade, petty traffic, and huckstering speculation. The sale of permits to do certain things absolutely forbidden. Such were among the last miserable shifts of this brave, wicked man, when his conscience came between the antagonist muscles of poverty and pride. For some of these very offenses he had been condemned by the court-martial. Even then he had secretly become at heart a scoundrel and a renegade, and covertly, under a feigned name, had already tendered his services to the enemy. The sentence of the court, sheer justice, but so graciously mingled with mercy, as scarcely to wear the aspect of punishment, supplied him with the very thing he coveted, a pretense for complaining of injustice and oppression. He sought the French ambassador, and after a plain allusion to his own needy condition, shouted forth in language not to be mistaken his willingness to become the secret servant of France. The prompt reply of the French minister is of record most honorable for himself and sufficiently humiliating to the spirit of the applicant. The result is, before the world, Arnold became a traitor, detested by those whose cause he had forsaken, and utterly despised by those whose cause he affected to espouse, trusted by them only because they well knew he might safely be employed against an enemy who would deal with him if captured, not as a prisoner of war, but as a traitor. I have thus briefly alluded to the career of Arnold only for the purpose of illustration. No truth is more simple, none more firmly established by experience, none more universally disregarded than that the growth of luxury must work the overthrow of a republic. As the largest masses are made up of the smallest particles, so the characteristic luxury of a whole people consists of individual extravagance and folly. The ambition to be foremost becomes ere long the ruling and almost universal passion. In still stronger language, it is all the rage. In a certain condition of society, talent takes the precedence of virtue, and men would rather be called knaves than fools. And where luxury abounds, as the poorer and middling classes will imitate the wealthier, there, or at least excuse them, right? There must be a large amount of indebtedness, and many men and women of desperate fortunes. We cannot strut about in unpaid-for garments, nor ride about in unpaid-for chariots, nor gather the world together to admire unpaid-for furniture, without an inward sense of personal degradation. It would be a poor compliment to our race to deny the truth of this assertion. True or false, the argument goes steadily forward, for if not true, then that callous, case-hardened condition of the heart exists, which takes off all care for the common weal and turns it entirely upon oneself and one's own aggrandizement. Nothing can be more destructive of that feeling or independence which ever lies at the bottom of republican virtue. This condition of things is the very hotbed of hypocrisy, and it makes the heart a forcing house for all the evil and bitter passions, envy, hatred, malice, and all uncharitableness. Pastors of all denominations may well unite in the chorus of the churchman's prayer and cry aloud, "Good Lord, deliver us." A very fallacious, mischievous estimate of personal array, equipage, and furniture has always given wonderful preeminence to this species of emulation. It is perfectly natural withal. Distinction of some sort is uppermost in most men's minds. It is comforting to many to know there is a tapis, the field of the cloth of gold, on which the wealthy fool is more than a match for the poor wise man. And as this world contains such an overwhelming majority of the former class, The A's have it, and luxury holds on. Virus acquirens cundo. None but an idiot will cavil, because a rich man adorns his mansion with elegance and taste, and receives his friends in a style of liberal hospitality. Even if he goes beyond the bounds of republican simplicity, and waste his substance, it matters not, beyond the circle of his creditors and heirs, if the example be not followed by thousands who are unable or unwilling to be edified by Aesop's pleasant fable of the ox and the frog. But it never can be thus. I had a book when I was a kid of a red-orange Aesop's Fables translation. But it can never be thus. The machinery is exceedingly simple in these manufactories, from which men of broken fortunes are annually turned out upon the world. When once involved in the whirl of fashion, extrication is difficult and painful, the descent is wonderfully easy. Sed revocare gratum. The maniac hugs, not his fetters, more forcibly than the devotee of fashion clings, with the assistance and occasionally of his better half, to his position in society. These remarks are by no means exclusively applicable to those who move in the higher circles. This is a word of gradation, and there are few so humble as to be entirely without their imitators. What shall we do to be saved? This anxious inquiry is not always offered, I apprehend, in relation to the concerns of a better world. How often and how oppressively the spirit of this interrogatory has agitated the bosom of the impoverished man of fashion. What shall I do to be saved from the terrible disgrace of being exposed in the court of fashion as being guilty of the awful crime of poverty, and disenfranchised as one of the beau monde? And what will he not do to work out his species of salvation with fear and trembling? We have seen how readily, under the influence of pride and poverty, treason may be committed by men of lofty standing. It would be superfluous, therefore, to inquire if there be any crime which men, heavily oppressed by their embarrassments, and restrained thereby from drinking more deeply of that luxury with which they are already drunk, will hesitate to commit.